Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Power Grid. Power Grid players are playing as a power company, trying to expand their network as much as possible. Let's jump right in with a description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks. This is Power Grid set up for a 4-player game. One of the first things you have to do when playing Power Grid is pick the side of the board. The default map is US on one side and Germany on the other. Of course, this is the US map in front of you. Then, depending on the number of players, you pick a certain number of adjacent units. With 4 players, it's 4. With 2 or 3 players, it's 3. And with 5 or 6 players, it's 5. So just to make it easy, we're going to use these 4 over here. Each player picks a color and takes all of the houses in that color, as well as 50 money. And money is hidden in this game, so you don't have to show the other players. And then you place one of your markers on the first base of the scoring track, and for the first turn only, turn order is randomized, so we have purple going first, with blue going last. And you fill the market, you fill everything in the coal row, then you fill the oil from 3 to 8, and you fill the garbage from 7 to 8, and you just start with uranium on spaces 14 and 16. To set up the market, you lay out power plants 3 to 6 in the bottom row, and then 7 to 10 in the top row. These are going to form the future market, and these 4 in the bottom are the actual market. You take the step 3 card and the power plant 13 aside, and depending on the number of players, you remove a certain number of cards from this deck. With 4 players, we remove 4 cards from this deck, which has already been done. With 5 or 6 players, you don't remove any, and with 2 or 3 players, you remove 8 cards. So then you take, in all cases, the number 13 and put it on top of the deck, and the step 3 goes on the bottom of the deck, and that forms your starting deck for the game. The game is played over 3 steps in rounds, and each round is broken into 5 phases. They are determined player order, auction power plants, buy resources, build, and then bureaucracy. So the game rules change slightly between the steps, and step 1 ends when a certain number of cities are connected, and we'll get to that later. And step 3 begins when that step 3 card is drawn, and it starts on the bottom of the deck. So the first phase is determined player order, and the way you do that is you see where players are along the scoring track here, and you just reorder accordingly. Whoever's the farthest out in front will become first, and then second will be second, and so on. If there's a tie, the tie is broken by the player with the largest number power plant. So if purple and green both had 2. If green's highest plant was 10 and purple's was 5, green would be ahead of purple. So green would go first in turn order. So during the first round of the game only, we skip this phase and we just determine turn order randomly. So the next phase is auction power plants, and this takes place in turn order. So if we were playing, it would be purple's turn. And during a player's turn, he can either pass or choose a power plant for everybody to bid on. When you choose a power plant, you have to bid at least that amount. So if purple chose this one, he'd have to bid at least 3 because that's the value of the power plant, but can certainly bid higher. And then in clockwise order, players take turns. They can either bid higher or pass, but once they pass, they cannot re-enter the bid later. Once everybody but one guy has passed, that person pays the amount of their highest bid to the bank and takes that power plant in front of them, and then immediately draws the next one from the deck and reorganizes, so that's always the 4 lowest in the actual market and the 4 higher ones in the future market in numerical order. Also, unless you're playing the 2-player game, a player can only have 3 power plants in front of them, so if they're taking a 4th one, they have to discard one they already have, but they can rearrange the resources on it if they have space on other ones to hold on to them. But if you are playing the 2-player game, you can have 4 power plants in front of you. In all cases, you are limited to be able to buy 1 power plant per turn. So if purple just went and someone else bought it, it would still be purple's turn, and purple gets to pick another one and bid on it, and so on until purple buys one. But once purple buys one, it becomes the next player's turn in turn order that hasn't yet bought a power plant. So if you go last, you can buy a plant just by paying the bare minimum value of that plant. And remember, if it's your turn to pick a plant and you pass, you don't get to bid on any plants for the rest of the round. If all players decide to pass for their turn, you just remove the lowest numbered power plant from the game and replace it as normal. You pretty much always replace power plants here. It's also important to note that during the first round of the game only, everyone must buy 1 plant. The rest of the game, you're totally free to pass, but in the first round of the game, you have to pick one and bid on it until you get one. Also, during the first round of the game only, after this phase, you reassign turn order. And since everyone's points are still going to be 0, you reassign with the highest numbered plant being first in turn order, and so on. So the rest of the game, you determine player order at that first phase of the turn, but that first turn, you're going to redetermine it after this phase. So after everybody's had a chance to pick a power plant or pass, we move on to the resource phase. Now this is played in reverse turn order. So whoever has the lowest score is going to go first, and whoever's up here in the 1 is going to go last. And players can buy up to the number of resources that their power plants can hold, and the cost of the resources is right here. So if right now coal only costs 1, oil would cost 3, and so on, and you always take accordingly. Just to be clear, power plants hold as double what they can actually use to produce. So what I mean by that is this can produce with 2 oils, so this can hold 4 oils. This can do 2 coals, so it can hold 4. This can only hold 4 resources total, but they can be any combination of oils and coal. And this would be 2 garbage, and so on. But you'll notice some power plants can't hold anything. Like this will produce for one city no matter what, but can't hold any resources because it doesn't use any. It's also important to note that as players have more than one power plant in front of them, they can freely rearrange the resources between them as long as that power plant can hold them at any time during the game. After everybody's had a chance to buy resources, we now move on to the building phase, and this is also played in reverse turn order, so whoever is last in the turn order track is going to go first. To build in a city, you always pay the default value of it plus any pathways adjacent to it. The first one you ever build is probably only going to be $10 because you only have to pay the default. And during step 1 of the game, which is what we begin in, each city can only hold one house. During step 2 of the game, you'll be able to build in a second location there, but it's going to cost 15, and during step 3, it's going to cost 20. But one color can only ever occupy that city. So even in a later step, blue could never build here again, but yellow or another color certainly could. After you build your first one, which again is only the cost, you have to pay these pathways. So if blue was here and blue wanted to build again, Cincinnati's space is open, so he can do that for 10, plus this 7, so that would be 17 to build there. You can also skip really far away and you have to pay all the costs of these. But you generally don't want to do that unless that's somewhere you need to be and the space in between is blocked. So players are free to build as many houses as they like as long as they can afford it in one turn, and you immediately adjust on the scoring track for every house you build. When you build that first one, you go to 1, and so on. So that's going to be a big factor in determining turn order. It's also important to note if a player builds a number of cities equal to or greater than any of the power plants in here, they're immediately removed. So if green had built 3 cities, for instance, this is immediately gone from the game and replaced as normal because one player or more have at least 3 cities, and this is only power plant value 3. To get rid of this one, the person would have to have 7 cities, and so on. After everybody's had a chance to build, we move on to the bureaucracy phase, which takes place in turn order, so it's going to start with the 1 and go down. Players decide how many buildings they're going to power, and they do that by paying resources. So if one player had this along with 2 oil, for instance, they could pay those 2 oil to power 1 city. And you have to own that many cities in order to power them. If you decide to power extra, it's just going to be a surplus that is lost. Also, each power plant can only be used once, so even if you had a whole bunch of oil, you can still only pay back 2 to power 1 place. The resources you pay go to the supply. They do not go to the market because the market will be restocked shortly. Based on how many places a player powers, they get a certain amount of money, and that's just on the back of your little player aid here, so you can always look at that if you'd like. It's also important to note that if you have a power plant that powers multiple things, you can't pay half of it to power half or anything like that. In order to use this plant, you must pay 2 coal, and you will power 2 cities. If you only had 1 city, the excess is lost, but you have to either use that whole plant or not that plant at all. After everybody's chosen how many plants to power and received money, the market is refilled, and there's a big chart on the back of the rule book that tells you, so we're 4 players and we know we're in step 1, so it shows us that we're going to add 5 coal, 3 oil, 2 garbage, and 1 uranium. And you'll note that these things change as the step of the game changes. So I've kind of already laid those out there, but the resources are limited in this game, so if there's not enough coal to restock all the way, we don't get to. And when restocking, we always place from the highest number down, so if we were restocking oil, we would start here and go downward. We don't start from the 1, we always move that way. Lastly, to end the round, we take the highest numbered card in the future market and put it face down under the deck, so it's under that step 3 card, and then we draw 1 more card to replace it as normal and rearrange accordingly. So now let's talk about the steps of the game. Step 2 starts when a certain number of buildings are built by a single player. In a 2-player game, that's 10 buildings. In a 3 to 5-player game, that's 7. And in a 6-player game, that's 6 buildings. When this happens, we remove the lowest power plant from the supply and throw it out of the game and replace as normal. Now during building, we can build 2 places in each, but the second one built there is going to cost 15. Also, in this bureaucracy step this turn, we would use those step 2 numbers for restocking the market. Step 3, on the other hand, just starts when that step 3 card is drawn, and it's going to begin in the following phase. So if that happens during the auction phase when the thing is being restacked, we keep that step 3 card in the supply, just treat it as the highest number and continue normally. And then after that phase is over, we remove that step 3 card and the lowest numbered card from the game. And this is the only time you do not replace. It then just becomes a market of 6, and there is no more future market. It is all the public market. And again, that happens in the next phase. So if that was in the auction phase, step 3 begins in the buying phase. If it came out during the building phase because somebody built enough buildings to knock one of these off, you would just draw it and then discard it and the lowest number again to make this group of 6. And then the step 3 would start in the following phase. And lastly, if it came up during bureaucracy when you put that highest card in the bottom of the deck, again, just discard it in the lowest and you've made the new stack. But in all cases, after the step 3 card comes out, make sure you do shuffle the deck of remaining cards. They're not going to stay in the same order they are. And now you are in step 3. In step 3, you can build 3 in each city. Remember that third one will cost 20. Also, at the end of the turn, instead of getting rid of the highest number and putting it to the bottom of the deck, you get rid of the lowest numbered power plant and just discard it from the game and then replace it as normal. It's also possible that you're totally out of power plants this way, but you always get rid of one and replace as much as you can. But if the deck's out, you can't replace. The game ends immediately after the building phase, in which a player builds a certain number of buildings depending on the player count. In a 2-player game, that's 21. In a 3 or 4-player game, that's 17. In a 5-player game, that's 15. And in a 6-player game, that's 14. And then there's one last supplying phase, and whoever supplies the most wins. It's not necessarily the person who built the most, but it usually is. Let's get going with this playthrough. We start with the determined player order phase, but during the first round of the game, it's totally random. So we move on to the auction phase, and purple goes first because he's first in turn order. So he picks this 4. He has to bid at least 4, but he decides to bid 6. And then it goes clockwise order. So green decides to bid 7, yellow will pass, and blue will pass. Now remember, yellow and blue cannot come back in later. Purple also decides to pass, so green has bought this power plant for 7. And this goes in front of him, and he doesn't already have 3 or anything like that, so he doesn't have to discard some. Just for space reasons, I'm going to stick it right here in front of him. And then, as usual, we'll shift this down and flip out a new one. So we got that 13 that we knew was coming, and we readjust accordingly. And then it's still purple's turn because it was his turn, so he's going to pick again. He's going to pick that 7, and he's going to bid 8 on it. Yellow decides to pass again, as does blue, so purple gets this one for 8. And then his turn is done. Now, normally this would go to green's turn because he's next in turn order, but he's already bought one, so it actually goes to yellow. And now yellow's turn, he has to pick one. Remember, it's totally normal to pass during this phase and not pick one, but during the first turn of the game, you absolutely must buy a power plant. So yellow is going to pick 8, and he's going to bid 8 on it, and blue decides to pass again. So yellow takes it in front of him, and then once again we readjust. Ooh, we got a 25, so that's going to be the highest number in the group now. And then for blue's turn, he's just going to take that 3, and he's only going to bid 3 on it. Since there's nobody left to bid against him, he gets it for 3, and he puts it in his area. Now, we refill one more time, so we got a 33. That's a pretty big number. And then this is what the market looks like now. Since blue is the lowest in turn order, you have to remember that this is the only time in the game. Normally, it's just by the determined player order phase, but right now we're going to reorder. So we know blue is last because he has a 3, and green is going to be second to last because he has a 4, and yellow is going to be the first player because he has an 8. So we move on to that buying resources phase, and blue gets to go first because this is in reverse player order. Now, blue can buy as many resources as he wants, but his power plants can only hold oil. So he can buy 2 times that amount of oil. If he wants to, he can buy 4, but he decides he's just going to spend $6, and again, that's because this is a 3 here, so each of these costs 3 to put those on his group. So he pays the 6 to the bank and takes those 2 oil, and then we go to green because he's next in player order, and he can buy coal. He decides he is going to buy as much as he can, which is 4 coal because they're pretty cheap. So he's going to get $1, 2, 3, $4, $5 worth of coal. And then now it's purple's turn. So purple can buy oil, and purple could buy up to 6 oil, but he decides he's going to be happy with 3, $7, $11 worth of oil. So yellow is last, and yellow decides he's just going to buy 3 coal, for $7. So we move on to the building phase. And once again, this goes in reverse player order, so blue's going to get to go first. Blue decides he just wants to build one place down here in Jacksonville. And remember, you can build your first one anywhere in the chosen regions. We chose these 4 regions for this game. So this is going to go here, and he's going to immediately move up on the track here. And we check if any of these match the number of cities he has. He only has 1 city, which is way less than any of the value of these plants. So he pays that to the bank. He could keep building if he wanted to. Like, for instance, he could build the Tampa for 10 plus 4. And remember, during step 1 of the game, you can only have 1 house in each area, and that first base costs 10. So then we move up to green, and green decides he doesn't want to be anywhere near blue, so he's going to build up here in Philadelphia. So he's going to stick there, and he decides he's actually going to build in New York as well before somebody else blocks him. And that is a free connection here because they're very close. So he paid 10 more and he built there. So he's up to 2 here. He might have to go sooner in turn order than he would like, however. So purple's turn. So he's going to go out here in Dallas. So once again, he pays 10 for his first one to stick in Dallas. But that's all he's going to do is just build that one. And lastly, yellow, because he was last in turn order. So he's going to go here in Minneapolis for 10. So then we move on to the bureaucracy phase, and in turn order, players decide how many places they're going to power. So yellow is first. He could certainly power this, but he really wants to keep the resources for right now, so he's actually going to power 0. Powering 0 still gets you $10, so he's going to take his $10. Then we go to purple, and purple decides he is going to pay his 3 resources to power 1. Although this powers 2, he only has 1 city, so that's the most he can power. And they go down here, and for powering 1, he gets $22. So he takes his $22. So then we move on to green, and it's his turn to power. He has a lot of coal. He'd love to use all of them to power both of these, but this power plant can only use 2 coal to power 1. It cannot use 4 to power 2. So he pays those 2 coal to the supply, and he gets $22. So he's left 1 plant, or 1 city, unpowered, but that is no disbenefit to him at all. And lastly, blue gets to go, and he would love to power this place, so he pays his 2 oil and takes $22. So next thing we do is we restock the market, and because this is a 4-player game and we're in step 1, we consult the little table here. So we know that we're going to put out 5 coal. Unfortunately, there's only 2 coal in the supply, so they go here and here. And then we know we're going to put out 3 oil. So we do that accordingly from the higher numbers down. And then we got 2 trash and 1 uranium. And then last thing we do is we take the highest number, which is this 33 here, and we put it on the bottom of the deck. We'll see that again during step 3. So then we start the next turn with determine player order, and we're going to run through this one real quick because we didn't do it the first turn. So green actually has the most cities, so green is going to bump himself up to first in player order. The rest of these guys are tied, so it goes by the value of their plants. And remember, blue had that value 3, so we know he's definitely at the bottom. Yellow had an 8, and purple had a 7. So purple is going to be behind yellow, and this is the order. And we proceed as follows, but we never switch the turn order again. It only switches during this phase. We're going to jump ahead to when somebody activates step 2. Welcome back. We're now in the building phase, and because that goes in reverse turn order, it's yellow's turn. So yellow is going to spend 30 to build 2 houses. This one is 14 here because it's 10 plus that 4 connection, and this one is 16. So now he goes up to 7, and we know that that means step 2 is going to start at the end of this round. So we get rid of the lowest numbered card, and we replace it as normal, and we reshuffle these so that they're in numerical order. So now we move on to the bureaucracy phase, and when we restock, we are going to use those step 2 numbers. We'll come back when we get to step 3 and then take a look at the end of the game. Welcome back. We've progressed a little bit further, and you can see we're in step 2 because some of the places have 2 on them. We're in the auction phase, and it's going to be blue's turn. Blue decides he wants to bid on this for 26. Purple, green, and yellow all pass. So he pays his 26 to the bank, and he takes the corresponding power plant. He decides which one to get rid of. He decides to get rid of this 10 here, and he can save these resources by putting them on his other power plant that holds them. So he moves them to that one because it can actually hold 4, and he gets rid of his 10. And then as normal, we flip from the top of the deck. It's the step 3. So we just treat this step 3 like it's a normal card, and we're going to finish out this phase. It's now purple's turn if he'd like to bid, but purple decides that he's going to pass, and then it's yellow's turn, and yellow is also going to pass, as is green. So this phase is over, and then remember, step 3 always starts in the next phase. So it's going to start right now with the buying resources phase, and we get rid of the lowest number along with that step 3. They're out of the game, and now we have 1 market of 6. Remember before there was an actual market in the bottom that you could buy from, and then a future market. Well, now we only have 6. And at the end of bureaucracy, instead of getting rid of the highest to the bottom of the deck, we're going to get rid of the lowest from the game. Also, you have to remember to shuffle these up, because this is going to be your deck from now on, and it's most of the high numbers that went under that step 3. We'll join back up at the end of the game to see what that looks like. Welcome back. Green, blue, yellow just finished building, and now it's purple's turn. He's going to pay $68 to the bank, and he's going to build a whole bunch of stuff. So he's going to build here, here, and here with that money. Just to be clear, since he was already here, this connection is free, so he only had to pay 20 because it's the 3rd building on this, and this is a 4 plus 20 for being the 3rd, and that's another 4 plus a 20. So altogether, he's now at 17 buildings, which means the game is over this round. So we do one final supplying step, and whoever can supply the most buildings is the winner. Fortunately for purple, he can in fact supply 5 by using this, 6 for free here, so that's 11, and then 17 by those 3 trash as well. Now, no one else even has 17, so we know purple is the winner. And that's how the game ends, though it is possible for another player with less cities to win if they can supply more than the player who actually finished the game. In the interest of time, I'm not going to talk too much, but Power Grid is a great game, although it is very mathy, especially the last turn of the game, so it's important that you keep your money a secret where people can really analyze the heck out of that last turn. The game is very strategic, and there are definitely some people who are very good at it. It plays really quick, though, as long as you have a banker and people understand what they're doing. So it's one I strongly recommend for any group that's into medium weight games or Euro style games. It's just a really well designed game. That's Power Grid.